Hi, Ed Bray from AgriFacts, publication here in Brussels. So I've got two questions, one on TTIP. The feeling I'm getting is that agriculture is not advancing as fast as some of the other sectors. Is that the way you see it? Where are we now with the agriculture section of the TTIP negotiations? And then a second question on the climate talks. There are some people saying that there's not enough focus on the livestock sector and the emissions that come from the livestock sector. We should be addressing consumption, growing consumption of meat products, and also addressing some of the emissions from livestock. Is that your feeling there isn't enough focus on this? Thanks.
Well, in relation to TTIP, we've had another round of negotiations just some weeks ago. There is progress being made in a number of various chapters on agriculture. They don't have to be making the same progress on tariff barriers as they are on non-tariff barriers, but there are certainly progress being made on a number of fronts, and we understand each other. We've made new offers on both sides across those particular two items on the agenda in October. Between now and the next round of negotiations, which are likely to take place in February, we will be taking stock in relation to what further moves we can make. I think that the atmosphere is better in terms of making progress. Now that TPP has been concluded with the United States, certainly I think there's a renewed focus now to try and make better progress perhaps and accelerate the momentum in relation to TTIP in 2016. European Union and the United States want an agreement, and of course there are going to be difficult negotiations from time to time, as well as in agriculture. There are other difficult areas on procurement, financial services generally, and regulatory issues. But negotiations are all about trying to do the deal, and we are certainly giving it everything we possibly can in terms of our attention to see can we get a fair deal, a balanced outcome across the range of issues.
You know, the history of trade agreements is that agriculture is oftentimes one of the last set of issues to get decided. So I wouldn't be overly concerned about the pace. I think progress has been made. I think we all believe more progress needs to be made. And the U.S. is looking for ways in which we can continue to create momentum. So we've been working on a number of issues the EU has raised with us relative to SBS issues and trying to open access to our beef market, for example, to other countries, Ireland, the Netherlands, Lithuania, and others, to try to build momentum for continued progress. I do need to underscore this is not going to be an easy discussion. There are some serious challenges ahead of us in the agricultural area, as is always the case. But I think with the conversations that take place, we gain a more in-depth understanding and appreciation for the issues that separate us, which opens up the opportunity for creative problem solving. And I think at the end of the day, that's probably what's going to be necessary on some of these very difficult issues. On the issue of sustainability and the climate and the livestock industry, you know, the United States has recently announced 10 building blocks for reducing emissions related to agriculture and doubling the rate of emission reductions. Our goal in the next 10 years is to reduce, to double the rate of emission reductions would be roughly 2% reduction of greenhouse gases, which contributes to the U.S. contribution of 26 to 28% reduction from 2005 levels. Part of that involves the livestock industry. Part of it involves renewable energy and the capture of methane. We're seeing a substantial amount of activity in that space. A significant amount of investment by the U.S. in digesters and things of that nature. We're also looking at ways in which we can improve our grazing patterns to significantly enhance the livestock industry's contribution. In the U.S., we're not about to dictate to folks what they should or shouldn't eat, but we do have a series of dietary guidelines in which we lay out what we think a healthy meal pattern looks like. I will say that meat is part of that. And it's going to be up to the individual consumer to make that decision. In the meantime, we're going to focus on ways in which we can ensure the livestock industry and all of agriculture does its fair share and its important share of emission reductions, and at the same time equipping the livestock industry and all of agriculture to adapt and mitigate to the changes that are going to occur as a result of things that have already taken place in the atmosphere.
I didn't answer the question on climate. Both of our geographic blocks account for about 10% of total emissions from agriculture. So we have similar type problems, but also in Europe we're spending 6 16.3 billion euro in the Rural Development Programme on very agri-climate measures. You'll be very familiar with one scheme in the country I know best in terms of beef genomics, which is trying to tackle I suppose the genetics and breeding part of the issue in terms of reducing emissions. So there's quite a range of issues that will affect a lot of projects over the next few years that will help to reduce emissions further. Agriculture has reduced in Europe its emissions by 24% since 1990. So we progress, but we obviously want to make more progress.
Thank you. Christoph.
Christopher Strzelanka, Polish Press Agency. Commissioner, European Union has higher costs in some agricultural sector. How would you like to address it in TTIP talks? And for Commissioner, for Secretary Vizek, European Union is facing challenges now in the dairy sector, in some other agricultural sector because of the Russian ban. The talks on TTIP are quite long, and we cannot expect that we will be finished very soon. So do you see some prospects, some possibilities to open the markets, for instance, for dairy or for apples, to help the European agricultures? Thank you.
I didn't get the first question there again.
Yeah, how would you like to address the fact that European Union in some area of the agriculture has higher costs than the US?
Well, this comes back, I suppose, to consumers. We have environmental and animal welfare obligations, and we support them through our rural development programs, and that's what our member states would like. That's what our consumers want. And as I mentioned in the course of my few words in answer to a question inside of the conference, we have to be competitive as a European agriculture, but we also have not just issues relating to environment, but also we have societal concerns apart from science that come into play. That maybe not the same in the United States, but certainly this is a challenge that we have in coming to some deal in the TTIP, and we will have to find a way in which we can meet our standards, meet our environmental obligations, meet our animal welfare issues, but also at the same time remain competitive. So our consumers are prepared to pay an additional price for their commodities and their products based on these particular obligations. We try and sell those particular issues as a positive in terms of the marketplace, particularly in the Far East, where they're seeking more and more of our goods from sustainable means of production, sustainable means of processing. So it's working well for us at the moment, but certainly there are additional costs that we have over and above what you have in many other countries around the world.
I think it's important for me to just respond to the first question, even though it wasn't directed at me. I think it is important from a U.S. perspective. As the commissioner was answering that question, I had myself in a Whole Foods market in Washington, D.C., where my wife and I shop from time to time. And as you go across the meat counter, for example, at Whole Foods, you have a wide variety of choices relative to steaks. You have grass-fed, you've got various marketing processes by which they tell you the degree of sustainability that this particular steak was produced under. And as a result, you see a corresponding increase in the price of the product that you're purchasing. So you may end up paying a substantially greater amount for a high level of sustainability versus perhaps an acceptable level of sustainability, but not the highest. It gives the consumer choice. And I think at the end of the day, that's our view. The market is going to basically, we need to give consumers a multitude of choices. We need to give them variety. But at the end of the day, they should make the decision, in our view, as opposed to a government making the decision. I don't think we're going to be able to have any kind of trade discussions or agreements where I'm compelling my friend here to adopt the U.S. system. And I don't think he's going to be particularly successful in me adopting the EU system. That's where the creative problem solving is necessary. It's to figure out how we might be able not to have identical systems, but equivalent systems. And in our view, give the consumer enough information so they can make an informed choice. And in the U.S., they'll make that choice, and that will then dictate and drive market opportunity. It's one of the reasons why there's a significant market today for EU goods and products in the U.S. There's a significant amount of resource that's spent by U.S. consumers on wine and cheese from Europe because they understand it's a high-value proposition. And I think Europe will be able to maintain that high value proposition in any trade agreement. On the issue of dairy, apples and pears, on the apples and pear issue, the horticulture issues, we're making progress. We, as I told the commissioner yesterday, we have, working through our process, an opportunity to open up that market for horticulture, for apples and pears, and we're going to continue that process. It's eventually going to go over to our Office of Management and Budget. They'll review it, and once it's open, that it is. The dairy issue is a complicated issue because we also have a struggling dairy industry right now in the U.S. And we have seen a rather dramatic increase in imports of certain dairy products that have put a great deal of strain on our dairy producers. And so we have to be careful and calibrate all of this to make sure that we don't necessarily disadvantage one group by giving an advantage to another group. And that's part of the challenge, I think, in these trade discussions, is how you figure out that sweet spot, that appropriate balance. Commissioner has raised issues with me, and appropriately so. We imposed an additional cost on butter coming in from the EU because we saw a 150% increase in butter imports, perhaps in part because of what you mentioned. That has put our producers at a significant disadvantage. Under the WTO, we are allowed to assess an additional cost. We've done that, but we have a deadline of December 31st, at which point that process will end. So we're going to continue to try to find that delicate balance.
We have time for one very last question. The lady here in the front, please.
Thank you. Sara Johansson, ATL. Question for Agriculture Secretary Vilsack. Today and yesterday in the European Parliament, you underline how very difficult the agricultural issues are in TTIP. And I was wondering, is it, say, for example, GIs for EU or GMOs for the US, is it even thinkable to have a TTIP without those issues included? And a quick question for Commissioner Hogan. Are there any particular financial instruments in the US that you are looking at? Thank you.
Well, here's the response to your question. The agricultural interests in the United States by themselves are not politically powerful enough, in my view, to get an agreement passed. But they are certainly powerful enough to stop an agreement that's been negotiated, which is another way of saying that if we don't address these thorny, difficult, tricky issues, decide to sidestep them, decide to shove them aside, decide not to deal with them because they're too hard, then you're not going to have, in my estimation, you're not going to have a TTIP agreement. So it does require creative problem solvers to figure out a way to deal with the GI issue, to deal with GMOs, to deal with pathogen reduction treatments, all of the sticky issues that we have, which is why it's hard. But having said that, we had the same kind of difficult issues in the Trans-Pacific Partnership with 11 countries, and we figured out a way to get that negotiated, and I'm very hopeful that our Congress will pass it in 2016. So it's a tough task, but it's not certainly an impossible task.
I'm setting up an Agri task force to look at various measures in 2016 that would be, in addition to the tools that we have available for volatility in the European Union agriculture sector. And we can learn a little bit from the experience of the United States in some of the financial-based and insurance-based products that they have in force there at the moment. And I'm going to let our group have a look at them to see and evaluate them to see are they appropriate, or some of them or all of them appropriate to European agricultural circumstances. So I won't go further than that in saying what my opinion is on them. We'll let the group decide that during the course of 2016 and make recommendations about which of them or any of them available that could be utilised to the best advantage of European agriculture.
We will finish our press conference here. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you all. Have a good day.